Hello, and welcome to English for Philosophy students. We are studying Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. We are in the 66th lesson and number 19 of rule number 7, which is to choose meaning above expediency. Last time, Jordan Peterson was sharing his own intellectual and spiritual experience, his own journey. Like others before him, Rene Descartes had said, "I think, therefore I am." Descartes rejected Christianity and wanted to find a ground of meaning, and he took apart everything, and at the very basis, he found that his own consciousness, the fact that he could think, was his basis. Now, Jordan entitles this section Doubt Past Mere Nihilism. Jordan, in the section we studied last week, discussed how Descartes' reasoning did not go far enough. For Jordan, consciousness could not be the most basic thing. Human consciousness, as Jordan began to think it through in the light of the history of the 20th century, he began to see that human beings, have an incredible capacity for evil. We can see that in the history of the 20th century. But Jordan reasoned that human beings must also have an equal but opposite capacity for good. And that goodness was harder to see, harder to conceptualize. We can clearly see the evil in the Nazis and the communists in the 20th century. But where do we see the heroic good? So we are picking up the reading toward the end of this section. So we're going to discuss the history of the 20th century and think about this some more. The last sentence, or even the last paragraph that we looked at last week, let's read that and then move into today's section. So we'll go into the last one we had last week. I, meaning Jordan Peterson, was simultaneously tormented by the fact of the Cold War. So, it obsessed me. It gave me nightmares. It drove me into the desert, into the long night of the human soul. I could not understand how it had come to pass that the world's two great factions, the West and the East, communism and the Allies, or even Hitler and the Allies, and then after that, communism and the free world, I could not understand how it came to pass that the two world's great factions aimed mutually assured destruction at each other. Was one system just as arbitrary and corrupt as the other? Was it a mere matter of opinion? Who was right, who was wrong? Were all value structures merely the clothing of power? So at this point, Jordan is looking at the free world and looking at the totalitarian communists and thinking, I would have thought that freedom was better, but they are acting just as evil as the communists. They are building nuclear bombs and proliferating nuclear weapons, the same as the communists. Maybe there's no real difference between the two sides. Maybe both only want power. And then he says, was everyone crazy? Because of the craziness of building these weapons first, and then, aiming them at each other in a way that would blow up the whole world. This is just craziness to Jordan. So let's move on. Just exactly what happened in the 20th century, anyway? How was it that so many tens of millions had to die, sacrificed to the new dogmas and ideologies? How was it that we discovered something worse, much worse, than the aristocracy and corrupt religious beliefs that communism and fascism sought so rationally to supplant? No one had answered those questions as far as I could tell. Like Descartes, I was plagued with doubt. I searched for one thing, anything I could regard as indisputable. I wanted a rock upon which to build my house. It was doubt that led me to it. Okay, we will briefly look at this and then move on to what he found. Okay, so going back to the top, he just said, was everyone crazy? He's thinking about the 20th century and the Cold War. And he asks, just exactly what happened in the 20th century anyway? Like, what was going on? How was it that so many tens of millions had to die, sacrificed to the new dogmas and ideologies? So, how was it simply means why. Why did millions of people have to die because of these new ideas, new dogmas and ideologies? A dogma is an idea you are required to believe in. You must believe in it, or you are a heretic and you are cast out. A dogma is a mandatory belief. Ideology. You know what ideology is. It's a system of dogmas that don't necessarily correspond to fact or science. Just mandatory. You have to believe these. That is an ideology. How was it? So again, why? How was it that we discovered something worse, much worse, than the aristocracy and corrupt religious beliefs that communism and fascism sought so rationally to supplant? Okay, so let us make sure you understand all the vocabulary. First of all, supplant means take the place of. So these new dogmas and ideologies were supposed to take the place of the failed ideology of the church, the failed methods of rule by kings, by aristocracy. So in the 20th century, in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a much more universal belief in Christianity, and also there were aristocratic rulers in many countries of the world. And humanity somehow decided this is not the best. We need a better system. And so they developed communism and fascism, both atheistic and both not connected to a hereditary passing of power from father to son, a special family, an aristocracy. So, new methods of rule, new methods of belief. This will be better. This is the city of man, as Augustine wrote. So, Jordan Peterson says, we were looking for something better. Why did we discover something worse? Much worse. Looking for something better, we searched within ourselves and found something worse. No one had answered those questions, as far as I could tell. So no philosopher had discussed this. Like Descartes, I was plagued with doubt. Plagued means it was a very difficult, horrible struggle in his mind over a long period of time with doubt. And in this case, doubt is what is real, what is true, what is meaningful, what can I rest my beliefs upon? For Descartes, it was, I think, therefore I am, human consciousness, human nature. Jordan considered that was not sufficient because it gave rise to something worse, much worse. It would be better to believe in religion than to believe in self, as the communists and the fascists had done. So, I, meaning Jordan, searched for one thing, anything I could regard as indisputable. So he is looking for the one ground that he can build his philosophy upon. Indisputable means something no one can argue with. Fact. I wanted a rock upon which to build my house. This is a biblical analogy. In the Bible, Jesus tells a parable about a man, two men. One built his house on sand at the ocean, shifting sand. And when the waves came, they knocked over his house. And a different man built his house upon a rock. And when the waves came, they bashed on his house, but they couldn't knock it down because its foundation was rock. So Jordan is looking for a foundation that will be a rock, that any ideas will splash upon, and his house, meaning his philosophy, will hold strong. It was doubt that led me to it. I like this sentence because it tells the reader that Jordan found something. Led me to it means he found it. And I am excited to read on. But we will point out, his main point in this sentence was that, like Descartes, doubt in the prevailing wisdom of the day, Christianity and the divine right of kings, aristocracy, rule, governance, doubt in those things, rejection of those things led Descartes to his foundation. I think, therefore I am. Human consciousness is the foundational reality, which leads to nihilism. Well, doubt in nihilism led Jordan to a rock. Let's see what that rock is. Hold on. We'll read the paragraph. I once read of a particularly insidious practice at Auschwitz. Hold on. I always have trouble making it move. Okay, so Jordan once read of a particularly insidious practice at Auschwitz. I think insidious means evil in a way that gets into the cracks. Like, for example, if you have water, a flood, in a building, the water will go into all of the cracks of the building, causing damage, and the whole house will be destroyed. Well, this insidious evil it goes into all the psychological crevices and does damage on many levels. Insidious evil practice at Auschwitz. And here it is. A guard would force an inmate to carry 100-pound sack of wet salt from one side of the large compound to the other, and then to carry it back. Arbeit macht frei, said the sign over the camp entrance. Work will set you free. That's German. I don't speak German. And the freedom that it spoke of was death. Work will set you free. The freedom would be death. Carrying the salt was an act of pointless torment. It was a piece of malevolent art. It allowed me to realize with certainty that some actions are wrong. So let's look at this paragraph. We've already spoken about the first sentence, so I won't move the text. So Jordan, the context is Jordan has discovered something he can not doubt, an indisputable fact that he can ground his philosophy upon. And then he tells this story of a particularly evil practice at Auschwitz. In that practice, a guard would force an inmate to carry 100-pound sack of wet salt from one side of the large compound to the other, and then to carry it back again. So let us notice a few things. Obviously, it is by force. There is no there's no sense that the inmate could offer to work. It is force. 100-pound sack. This is quite heavy, and these inmates were starving, and they were weak, and they had no clothing, almost no clothing. So carrying such a thing would be hurting their skin. It would be very, very hard. And notice it is wet salt. They didn't just say, carry that salt They got it wet first. That means, number one, it is heavier, and number two, the salt is dissolving into their skin, which is ultimately painful to them. This is an added pain, an added weight that was unreasonable and unnecessary. It was added because of the desire to give maximal pain. It was added by essentially an artist, someone who didn't just want to keep the prisoners working. He wanted to give them exquisite torment. So not just carry it, get it wet first so it'll be heavy and it will be putting out salt. And then carry it back and forth from one side of a large compound. So this is a long way to go. From the moment you start carrying it, you have a sense of despair. It's a long way to go. And then back and forth forever. So this is pointless. The rational mind thinks, why am I doing this? And that in itself is torment to some kinds of minds. Okay, then the German phrase, which I can't pronounce correctly, Arbeit macht frei, said the sign over the entrance, work will set you free. When you first enter the camp and you see the sign, work will set you free, you think, oh, if I work hard, they will free me. But it was an irony. The work would kill them, and then they would be free of torment. Carrying the salt was an act of pointless torment. Pointless torment. It was a piece of malevolent art. Okay, so what Jordan is saying is, this is not, he's explaining, he is giving us a picture of an evil, demonic motivation. Someone who wants to raise torture to the form of an art. It allowed me to realize with certainty that some actions are wrong. Here's our with certainty. Remember in the last paragraph he said he was looking for an indisputable fact. Here it is. Some actions are wrong. This is the indisputable fact. Some actions are wrong. Let us move on. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote, definitively and profoundly, about the horrors of the 20th century. The tens of millions who were stripped of employment, family, identity, and life. In his Gulag Archipelago, I think I actually have that right here. I won't waste any time if it's not right here. Yep. Gulag Archipelago. Really big book. Very upsetting. You should read even the first 2 or 3 chapters will give you the idea. Anyway, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I'll go for green. Let me see. Let's do this one. Wrote definitively and profoundly about the horrors of the 20th century, the tens of millions who were stripped of employment, family, identity, and life. In his Gulag Archipelago, in the second part of the second volume, he discussed the Nuremberg trials, which he considered to be the most significant event of the 20th century. By the way, let's pause for a moment. and talk about this book, The Gulag Archipelago. My memory of the situation is that Solzhenitsyn, who was himself a prisoner in the gulags, began to write anecdotes of what he saw. And others also wrote down in secret testimony of what they had seen, and they all gave them to Solzhenitsyn, who kept them. And he managed to smuggle, in other words, to transport them illegally out of Russia to England, I think. And later, when he escaped, he compiled all of the testimony that he had gotten into this Gulag archipelago. It is not only anecdotes, it's also data, statistics, facts. It is a full expose of what was happening in Russia at the time that the propaganda said that Russia was a utopia of peace, prosperity, health, happiness, fraternity, the good life. There were pictures of healthy, robust farmers with pink cheeks mowing acres of grain, and buxom and beautiful maidens carrying loads of bread to the field for the farmers. There were pictures of every sort of prosperity and plenty. And the liberal media in the United States cooperated with this propaganda. They were the useful idiots, and they disseminated this. And at that time, people in America thought that everything in Russia was terrific. But what was actually happening is documented here, and it was a secret. And when this book was published, which, I feel like I remember it. I'm not sure when it was. I would have been very young. But I think my father was talking about it. And it was such a shock. And you should read at least the beginning, which will give you the idea of what the system, the totalitarian system, was. You really should get the first few chapters, at least. Okay, if you want to know what happened in the 20th century and what can happen again with us, because now the globalists and the new Marxists are taking over the West right now through the lever of coronavirus, which is a big, I don't even want to use the word hoax. It's a deception that has given power to the left to dismantle, to take apart the institutions of the West of freedom so that they can bring in totalitarian institutions. It can be like this again if we're not careful. So educate yourself. For the last 50, 60 years, the education system in the West has hidden the truth, and it is likely that you don't know what went on. You should educate yourself now while you can. The more people who know what's going on, the less likely the left is to be able to take over, because free people tend to defend themselves. So, educate yourself. And if you're watching this, maybe you are trying to educate yourself. Okay, let us go on. I'm going to start at the beginning again of this paragraph. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote, definitively and profoundly. So definitively means it's definitely true and it's correct. Profoundly means it's deep. It's not shallow, and it's not just little statistical numbers without real meaning. It's profoundly true. And definitively means no other source of information will come in and contradict this in the future. This is the definitive information of what happened in Russia in the 20th century. Okay, so he wrote definitively and profoundly about the horrors of the 20th century. I want to say, by the way, we do not have a word in English that is bad enough to describe what I read in the Gulag Archipelago and other works of the day. Horror is too mild. Okay. The horrors of the 20th century, the tens of millions who were stripped of employment, family, identity, and life. So, stripped means they took it away. It has a violent connotation. Not just they removed it gently. They ripped it off. And I'm telling you, he is not saying some people lost employment. Some lost family. Some lost identity, and others even their lives. He is saying one individual was stripped of employment and family and identity and life. They were canceled. And this is what the left is seeking to do today, almost like a child playing with a toy gun. They're playing with canceling people for very small or reason or no reason. They're selecting some random quote from the 10 years ago, 15 years ago, pulling it up and attempting to destroy a person for fun. Just like a child would kill a cat or smash a bug. They're canceling people for fun. So this is in the 20th century, they canceled people by taking away first their all at once, their employment, their family, kill the whole family, take the business, kill the family in front of them, strip them of their identity by making them repeat falsehoods that were transparent, obvious falsehoods that they didn't believe, make them say anything, and then kill them. You also see this in the George Orwell book, 1984, which I also have here somewhere, several copies. But I can't put my finger on it right now. I don't have my glasses on, and I was reading it recently, so it's out of place. But in the end of 1984, they are making the protagonist say something like 2 + 2 is 5. And he finally agrees 2 + 2 is 5. And then they shoot him. You could say that 1984 was prescient. In other words, seeing ahead what would come. But you would be wrong. 1984 was describing what was happening at that time, actually. And it is beginning to happen again for us. So, another good book to read, 1984, by George Orwell. Another one for you to read is Animal Farm by George Orwell, which is an easier read. Easier to read, but profoundly true. It is the mechanism by which the left took over Russia. So anyway, so they canceled people. They stripped them of employment, family, identity, and life. In his Gulag Archipelago, in the second part of the second volume, he, meaning Alexander Solzhenitsyn, discussed the Nuremberg trials, which he considered the most significant event of the 20th century. Now what? Where did that go? What happened? Speaking of canceling things, let's see if I can find my page again. Here we are. The conclusion of those trials: there are some actions that are so intrinsically terrible that they run counter to the proper nature of a human being. Okay, so this is another one of those ground, bedrock, indisputable facts for Jordan Peterson, so I'm going to highlight it. There are some actions that are so intrinsically terrible that they run counter to the proper nature of human beings. So basically, right now, Jordan Peterson is finding his bedrock reality in the nature of evil. Let's keep reading. This is true essentially, cross-culturally, across time and space. Okay, let me go here. Let me do this. This is true essentially. Actually, I want that to be green. Come on. Why is my thing not working the way I want it to? Okay. This statement is true essentially, in its essence, intrinsically, through and through. Cross-culturally. So this is not something that would be true in America, but not in China. And let us remind ourselves, what is true essentially and cross-culturally? That there are some actions that are so intrinsically terrible that they run counter to the proper nature of human beings. True, cross-culturally. And then across time and space, time and place. So it's always true. This is a bedrock truth that Jordan Peterson is looking for. These are evil actions. No excuses are available for engaging in them. Evil. To dehumanize a fellow human being, to reduce him or her to the status of a parasite, to torture and slaughter with no consideration of individual innocence or guilt, to make an art form of pain. That is wrong. Okay, that is wrong. All of this is wrong. This is Jordan Peterson's fundamental truth that he is finding right here. To dehumanize a fellow human being, in other words, to fail to treat them with the dignity that should be accorded a being made in God's image. You know, I don't know if you know, that my grandchildren are also Olavo de Carvalho's grandchildren, because my daughter is married to his son. So we have a boy, Jackson, who is very like Olavo. I'm telling you, first of all, he looks like his father, Pedro, but he's also small, and he's always in a book, constantly in a book. The other children are out playing in the sunshine, and Jackson comes in, and he is reading a book. And when he was maybe 3 years old, maybe, I had an experience. I had the children at the park, all the children. He only had a few siblings then. And I was sitting on a bench, and there was our diaper bag was sitting next to me on the bench. And Jackson was standing in front of me, and a lady came up and said, "May I sit down here?" And I said, "Of course, I'll move the bag." And I moved the bag so that she could sit down. And Jackson said, "Because a human being is in the image of God, and a bag is not." Jackson saw the reason we give place to the human being is because she is in the image of God. And a bag, a thing, is not. This is a 3-year-old. Maybe he was 4, 3 or 4. He was little. And the lady was really surprised. I was surprised. What small child knows that human beings have a right to be treated with dignity because they're in the image of God? Of course, we probably taught him that, but still, he remembered it and connected it. Certainly, we never said a human being is to be given place to more than a bag. Nothing. He made all those connections himself. Anyway, to dehumanize a human being is evil. To reduce the human being, him or her, by the way, him or her is essential. Do not doubt that him and her are essential truths, deep, essential, profound truths. It is a lie that they're insignificant and can be replaced. It is a lie that it is a small thing to force you to call a man she. That is not a small thing. That is like in 1984, making the protagonist agree that 2 + 2 is 5 before you shoot him. Don't do it. Men are not women, and women are not men. So, to dehumanize a fellow human being is evil. To reduce him or her to the status of a parasite. Now, this is what the Nazis did to the Jews. They taught their children in school, the Germans did, that the Hitler Youth, they taught them that Jews were dirty, filthy, that they were bad for society, that they consumed but did not give anything, that they were a poison, that they were worse than roaches, cockroaches that you exterminate. This is what the Nazis did to help their young people be willing to exterminate the Jews. So, to reduce him or her to the status of a parasite. You know, a parasite is something that lives on you and eats you, but is bad for you. Okay. To torture and to slaughter with no consideration of individual innocence or guilt. Now, this is interesting. You might just say, he might have said, to torture a human being is evil. He did not. He might have said, to slaughter a human being is evil. He didn't. He said, to torture and slaughter with no consideration of individual innocence or guilt. There are people who are such pacifists. Maybe I'm using the term pacifist wrong. There are people who are against the death penalty. There are people who are against disciplining children with any sort of physical means. There are people who are against using any sort of physical punishment for criminals, no matter how bad the crime. Those people are wrong. God himself says in the Bible and in Christian revelation and tradition that if a person murders, he should be killed by the authority, by the government. It is not murder to execute a criminal. It is the appropriate response to the heinous act of murder which they committed. So, it is not evil to torture and slaughter, full stop. It is evil to torture and slaughter without consideration of individual innocence or guilt. So you should not execute an innocent man, but you should execute, not you, the authorities, should execute a guilty man. You should not hurt or torture in any way an innocent man, but it is allowable to use painful punishments in the occasion of guilt. This is not very popular, but it is true. So I just want to point out, this is part of the sentiment of what Jordan is saying. I don't want you to miss it. Okay? And then finally, to make an art form of pain, that is wrong. So, if a person must execute a criminal, or if a person must punish a bad guy, you should not enjoy punishing. You should not enjoy executing, killing. It should be with grief, not with pleasure. It is evil to devise better and better ways to inflict pain. That would be what the devil does. So that's evil. Okay, it's actually time for us to stop. I don't think we have time for another paragraph. Let me see how long it is. Well, let's finish, because we have the next section coming. So this is the last paragraph in the section we are doing now. And I'll take purple. What can I not doubt? So this is Jordan Peterson saying, where is my indisputable fact that I can rest my philosophies upon? Something I do not have to doubt. My rock. What can I not doubt? The reality of suffering. So I'll highlight that. The reality of suffering. This is part of Jordan Peterson's foundational rock. It is something that is indisputable. It exists. It brooks no argument. That means you can't argue with it. It won't allow you to argue. It is indisputable. Nihilists cannot undermine it with skepticism. Nihilists don't believe in anything, but they can't deny the reality of suffering. Totalitarians cannot banish it. So the idea being totalitarians exist because they're trying to do a utopian society, and they have all power to control everybody. And they were trying to make something better than the world governed by Christianity and secular authority aristocracy. Well, totalitarians cannot banish suffering. You do not find this power within human consciousness and the nature of man. Cynics cannot escape from its reality. A cynic doesn't believe really in anything. They just see irony and falsehood everywhere. But they cannot protect themselves from suffering. Suffering is real. I'll give that a highlight. Suffering is real. And the artificial infliction of suffering, the artful infliction of suffering on another person for its own sake is wrong. This is Jordan Peterson's foundation. That became the cornerstone of my belief. Searching through the lowest reaches of human thought and action, understanding my own capacity to act like a Nazi prison guard or a Gulag archipelago trustee or a torturer of children in a dungeon, I grasped what it meant to take the sins of the world onto oneself. This is what Jesus did. Jesus took all of the potential evil in human consciousness into himself. He went to the very bottom, and it was punished. It was crucified. And then he went to the very top. Jesus plumbed the depths and descended the heights. And through plumbing the depths, Jordan Peterson began to understand what Jesus had done. Each human being has an immense capacity for evil. Each human being understands a priori, perhaps not what is good, but certainly what is not good. So every human being has capacity for evil and understands it, although they may or may not understand the good in the same kind of way. And if there is something that is not good, then there must be something that is good. Oops. I have to quit doing that. So, if there is something that is not good, then there must be something that is good. If the worst sin is the torment of others, merely for the sake of the suffering produced, then the good must be whatever is diametrically opposed to that. The good is whatever stops such things from happening. So, Jordan Peterson is extrapolating from the evil he's able to clearly see to the nature of the good which he is searching for. And that's where he ends it for today. Whatever is down is the mirror of what is up, with the zero baseline in the middle. And I can see this, therefore I can extrapolate the existence of that. So let's stop here and come together again later for the very last section in Rule 7. If you can believe it, we're almost there. See you later.